Nova, originally scheduled for this time, will be seen Sunday, February 28th at 10 a.m. Stay tuned now for the WPBT presentation, Mark Herman, Killer or Victim.
I think for me to commit a cold-blooded, calculated murder, that's not me. You know, I was a street fighter.
It was in this courtroom 10 years ago in February that Mark Herman, a fourth-degree black belt in karate, with a reputation as a punk, a prison sentence for 7 criminal offenses, and a job as a bouncer, was convicted of the first-degree murder of Palm Beach oil executive Richard Kreuzler. Channel 2 televised the trial gavel to gavel, allowing thousands of viewers the opportunity to see the criminal justice system at work. Tonight, we look back at what has happened during the span of 10 years to those who defended him, prosecuted him, testified against him, investigated his case, and fight for his release. When Mark Herman was sentenced to 25 years in prison on February 22nd, 1978, in the courtroom of Judge Thomas Schultz, was he a killer or the victim of a legal system gone haywire?
All right, the clerk will publish the verdict.
In the Circuit Court, Criminal Division, in Palm Beach County, Florida, case number 77-1236-DF, State of Florida versus Mark A. Herman. We, the jury, find the defendant Mark A. Herman guilty of first-degree murder as charged in the indictment, so say we all, February 22nd, 1978, by Palm Beach, Florida, William F. Spear, Jr. Coleman.
The trial lasted 2.5 weeks. The jurors deliberated nearly 10 hours. Prosecutor Jack Scarola.
All of the people that worked on that case did a remarkably fine job in putting together a lot of little pieces, which, once assembled, created a very compelling picture of Mark Herman's guilt.
Mark Herman's defense attorney today, Joe Mintzberg.
We believe that Mark Herman has received the royal screwing of the century by the judicial system, by the court system in the state of Florida, and we wanted to correct it.
And for 10 years, Herman has continued to claim he is innocent.
I'm not a killer. I don't have any desire to kill people. I was a fighter, and I think I've purged myself of that. This fight right here is the toughest fight I've ever had.
Tim Pallison was a reporter for the Miami Herald 10 years ago. Today, he is the assistant managing editor for the Palm Beach Post. Shocked by the jury's guilty verdict, he has continued to investigate the murder.
It was the first case in Palm Beach where someone had been killed in over 10 years, and so there was tremendous political pressure to get it solved during an election year, and when the verdict came down, there was a great deal of controversy as to whether or not the right man had been convicted. At this newspaper, there's never been a subject that has generated more letters to the editor than the conviction in that case. The public that has an opportunity because of Channel 2 to watch it gavel to gavel was essentially outraged. The public opinion was pretty unanimous that man should never have been convicted.
How did it happen that Mark Herman found himself in prison? On the evening of January 16, 1976, Richard Kreuzler went to answer the doorbell at his home in Palm Beach. As he approached the front door, he was hit in the abdomen with a shotgun blast fired through a window at the side of the entrance. Investigators believe it knocked Mr. Kreuzler out of sight, and then the killer ran around to the front door where he fired 2 more shots through the door. The first shot was about waist high, the second about 8 inches off the floor. The question is still being raised today. Was the method used that of a combat-trained veteran or a pro hitman who knew about the side window? It was that first shot through the side window that was responsible for Kreuzler's death 13 days later. During the next year, police in Palm Beach, the sheriff's office, and the Florida Department of Law Enforcement investigated the murder. Nearly a year after the murder took place, Mark Herman was arrested. Jack Scarola, the prosecutor in the case, convinced the jury that Mark Herman, intending to murder Billy Glocker, a known drug dealer, had gone to the wrong house and killed Richard Kreuzler by accident. However, the homes of Glocker's parents and Kreuzler were nothing alike. The Glocker home was a two-story brick. The Kreuzler house was a one-story frame with a lighted sign near the door that read Kreuzler. The jury bought the wrong man theory. The question is still being asked. How could someone mistake Kreuzler for Glocker? Glocker was a young man, Kreuzler middle-aged. Glocker was 6'4" tall, Kreuzler 6'2" tall, and 30 pounds heavier. Kreuzler was balding. Glocker wore his hair in an afro and lost a leg in Vietnam and walked with a limp. Kreuzler had both of his legs. The murder frustrated the authorities because there were no eyewitnesses, no murder weapon was found, there was no physical evidence, no fingerprints, no footprints. Billy Glocker lived in West Palm Beach, and after the trial held a press conference saying he'd had no dealings with Mark Herman. It was Glocker's effort to clear his name. The conviction that Jack Scarola was successful in achieving was mainly as a result of testimony from 4 people, all of whom were jail inmates along with Mark Herman. The other important piece of evidence that Scarola referred to frequently during the trial was an alleged confession. And we say alleged because it was never proven that Mark Herman wrote the confession. During the last 10 years, experts have stated absolutely that Herman did not write that confession. But let's look at the 4 men who testified against Herman.
I'm going to give you a list of some people's names, and I'd like you to give me a sentence that describes these people and then how you feel about them today. Start with what? Have mercy. Okay, we'll start with some easy ones.
Dexter Coffin was a wealthy Palm Beach playboy who found himself frequently in trouble with the law and was in and out of jail for bad business deals and forging prescriptions.
Very manipulative con man. He's a guy with that much money that can't keep himself away from cough syrup. Just a sick kid, you know. And I don't have any animosity towards Dexter, you know, and I don't feel sorry for him either, you know, it's his own thing, but again, he's another one of them guys that he is what he is, you know.
I have and had represented Dexter Coffin over the last 12 years or 14 years. And because of Dexter's problems, particularly his problems with cough syrup addiction, it would be difficult for me to determine when Dexter was telling the truth.
West Palm Beach attorney David Roth has had an interesting role during the last 10 years. At the time of the trial, Roth was the attorney for Dexter Coffin. Later, Roth was to become Herman's attorney. But when they could not seem to agree on how to approach appeals, they parted ways on a friendly basis.
Let's talk about Dexter Coffin. Obviously a key, not only in the trial, but a key to your investigations. What exactly happened with him?
Well, he was, at the time of the trial, he was someone that I'd gotten to know as a reporter in the news source. He was a fascinating individual separate from the Mark Herman case. And I'd gotten to know him, established a degree of trust, and he essentially came to me afterwards, after a woman that he had met up in Maryland had encouraged him to speak honestly with someone he trusted back in Palm Beach as to the testimony he had given. He came to me. He escaped from a mental hospital in Maryland on a Thanksgiving weekend and essentially showed up on my doorstep saying that he wanted to explain something terrible that he'd done.
Dexter Coffin confessed to Tim Pallison that he had forged a confession that stated Mark Herman had killed Richard Kreuzler.
Tim, a lot of people have a hard time deciding when Dexter Coffin is telling the truth or isn't. Did you find yourself at all in that dilemma?
Oh, sure. You have to, with Dexter Coffin, you have to be very suspicious as to what he's saying and why he's saying it, and the only way to determine truth, I think, is the way any good police investigator determines it, by determining motive, the motivation for saying whatever he may be saying on any given time. And Dexter had absolutely no motivation whatsoever in saying that he had lied at the trial. It wasn't going to gain him anything. The state attorney's office here locally was immediately suggesting perjury charges would be filed against him if he stuck with the story that he had lied at the Herman trial. So there was nothing but aggravation that Dexter was going to be gaining from saying that he gave perjured testimony.
At the same time, he has since that time recanted his recantation.
True. We have had a falling out for about 3 years now, and he phoned me up about the time that he recanted and said that this was my punishment, that he would recant, and he was also in a position at that time where he was trying to establish some credibility up in Virginia with some legal problems that he had up there, and for him to be an admitted perjurer in Florida did not help him with his situation in Virginia.
Gerald DeNono was a 3-time convicted murderer. He knew he might be facing the electric chair.
He got away with murder. I have animosity against him. I think that he's, out of all of them, was the only one that I could see his reasoning for trying to put a man in the electric chair.
He's still alive.
Yeah. But he dealed his life for mine. And he was facing the electric chair, and I could see, I could understand him. He's a killer anyway, so killing one more guy, doing it through the system wasn't anything to him. And, he's expected, he's out there as the person that he is, and you shouldn't expect anything different from him. I didn't. I don't think anybody else should.
DeNono, those who knew him when he came through Palm Beach County have said that there's no one quite like him. He's been convicted of 3 murders. State attorney felt and still does that no one that's probably committed a crime in Palm Beach County is more deserving of the electric chair than Jerry DeNono. But he was a brilliant man. He was a manipulator to the first degree, and he was able, better than anyone, even probably Coffin, in sensing what it would be that would better his own cause in terms of sensing what the big cases were where he could give testimony. And in exchange for his becoming a prosecution witness in a variety of cases, his goal was to escape the electric chair. And he relished later on telling me the great success that he had because of the Herman case and others in getting police officers and the prosecutor from the Herman case to testify in his behalf after he had been convicted of Palm Beach County murder.
Was there a deal made with DeNono?
There was no deal made with DeNono. And I'm sure, as clever a man as Jerry DeNono was, he knew that if he could help the state out, he was going to be able to try to turn around and use that to his advantage later. And I don't think that he was a man who was helping the state of Florida out of the goodness of his heart or any sense of moral obligation. He was doing it because he wanted to gain that later advantage. I wasn't in a position to deny him that advantage. I didn't promise it to him. I didn't deal with him to give it to him, but I was certainly not in a position to deny it to him either once I was subpoenaed and required to answer questions put to me under oath.
Tim Pallison heard Dexter Coffin recant his testimony, believes that DeNono would recant if it would help him in any way. And he also went to visit Arthur Baines during his investigation. Arthur Baines was Herman's cellmate at the Palm Beach County Jail. At the trial, he testified Herman had admitted he killed Kreuzler by accident. He has since recanted his testimony under oath.
I simply made a prison visit to Arthur Baines, and it was a bizarre circumstance where I sat down with him and started talking about this, and his first response was, "Well, hasn't that murder been overturned?" And he'd been out of touch in prison, and he had assumed that it had been discovered as a sham, the prosecution effort. And he without any prodding whatsoever, immediately explained how his testimony was perjured and why he gave perjured testimony.
David Wayne Gibson told the grand jury Mark Herman never confessed to the murder. Later, he testified against Herman at the trial. Gibson said he decided to help the prosecution when the chief jailer threatened to put him in a cell where he could have suffered physical harm or even death. After the trial, he gave a sworn deposition. He had felt forced to lie at the trial.
David Gibson was not an extremely credible character, but he was a person that was caught up in a set of circumstances at the Palm Beach County Jail at that time, where there was a good deal of pressure upon inmates to testify certain ways, and we had a jail trustee backing up David Gibson's story that he had been threatened by the jail captain at that time to give a story favorable to the prosecution. The trustee happened to be near the jail captain's office when that threat was made, and Gibson's testimony was that he would have been thrown in a cell with some fairly dangerous black inmates if he did not give a story that was favorable to the prosecution, and for that reason he gave the testimony he did.
One of the people who appears to have played a key role in the gathering of many of these witnesses was the chief jailer, Jack Donnelly. What did your investigation show about his role?
It showed a man that was a former sailor with the Navy who retired from the Navy and got a job basically as the custodian of the county's jail inmates. He wanted to be an investigator. He had no training, and he was an affable man with basically good intentions. Where he started, there became a very clear pattern where Jack Donnelly was encouraging a few favored, intelligent inmates to give testimony in important cases where Donnelly could get a feather in his cap by assisting in getting a conviction, and those inmates in turn got a wide variety of favors, everything from gourmet food into their jail cell to reduced sentences, and in Donno's case, the ability to escape the electric chair. It was a fascinating system of jailhouse testimony, and jailhouse testimony is all that the prosecution went to trial with in the Mark Herman case. It was five jail inmates that gave testimony. One never made it to trial, and all of those five witnesses were well aware of the procedure that existed in Palm Beach County, where you were able to better your own situation by giving testimony for the prosecution.
Based on what you've learned through your investigations and over the last 10 years, what is your opinion as to the guilt or innocence of Mark Herman?
I think there's strong indication that an innocent man has been convicted of that murder. Like I said, I can't tell you who did kill Richard Chrysler, but I think the evidence that was presented at trial is essentially washed out. And when you take that away, Mark Herman is no more guilty of that crime than you or I am.
Did you always feel that way?
Not at all. I as a reporter, I assumed that when the news first broke that we had a suspect in the Chrysler homicide, that the police had done their work, and I went along with that assumption.
What was the turning point?
The turning point wasn't until well after the trial, when the witnesses did start to make it very clear to me what their motivations were for lying at the trial itself. They had every reason to give perjured testimony, and there was no motivation, there was no logical motivation, nothing that they had to gain by saying that they lied at the time of the trial.
Each of those witnesses who were incarcerated at the time definitely had something to gain as a result of cooperating with the state. And again, those motives were acknowledged in opening statement. They were explored during the course of the examination of those witnesses. They were explored carefully during the cross-examination of those witnesses, and they were a focus of much attention during closing argument from both sides. We knew that these were people that had a motive to lie, and that made the scrutiny of their testimony even more significant. That's why a very careful corroboration through circumstantial evidence was absolutely essential to that conviction, because you couldn't trust the inherent truthfulness of anything that those people had to say. There was nothing inherent about their character upon which you could rely. You had to assume that they were lying and then look for reasons to prove that they weren't.
I talked with a number of people who played a role in the conviction of Mark Herman, who seek his release through the appeal system, who continue to investigate his case, and who played key roles in this courtroom 10 years ago. Alfonso Seppi, who now sits on the bench in Miami courts, was Herman's defense attorney. He has requested we air this disclaimer, and we ask that you keep this in mind through this story as it pertains to any excerpts we use from Judge Seppi's interview.
I want to stress at the outset that I am not speaking as a judge. I am speaking as Mark Herman's former lawyer, and only as his former lawyer, as we recount some of the matters that you intend to question me about. And under no circumstances do I want anybody in the viewing audience to think for a moment that I am speaking as a judge or as any official of the state of Florida. I'm only speaking in my former private attorney capacity as Mark Herman's lawyer.
During the last 10 years, Alfonso Seppi has been criticized by a number of his peers for his defense of Mark Herman. And in fact, his defense, described by Herman's present lawyers as inadequate, has been the basis for unsuccessful appeals in the appellate courts. Seppi's defense succeeded in keeping the written confession that Dexter Coffin says he wrote from being admitted as evidence. However, Coffin wrote a letter to his attorney describing in detail that confession, and Seppi allowed that letter to be admitted as evidence. Joe Mintzberg presented this opinion in arguments before the courts.
The cornerstone to the prosecution in this case was the confession that Dexter Coffin surfaced with. It became known as Exhibits 47 and 48 in this case. Seppi, if he had done his homework, if he was in a position to properly try this case, would have realized, first of all, that the state of Florida was in no position to have 47 and 48 admitted into evidence. So he should have exerted every effort to keep 47 and 48 out of evidence and any and all references to it as Herman's confession from going to the jury in this case. He simply failed to do that.
The confession wasn't.
The actual confession did not go into evidence. 47 and 48 were properly ruled inadmissible because the state was not able to prove that Herman was the author. Without being able to prove Herman was the author, they could not prove the genuineness of the document, and therefore became irrelevant to this case. But Seppi allowed another document, 56, which was a letter that Coffin had written to his lawyers describing the prior week's incidents and containing a verbatim recital of the contents of 47 and 48, i.e. the confession. When the prosecutor attempted to introduce Exhibit 56, the Coffin letter, into evidence, it came in without objection. And the jury heard the verbatim contents of 47 and 48 via the letter 56, which Mark's lawyer didn't object to, and the floodgates were thereupon opened, and the jury heard all about this confession. And throughout the case, witness after witness was called to talk about the confession. In a first-degree murder case, Herman's lawyer allowed in an inadmissible confession. Outrageous. In any event, if it was Herman's lawyer's plan to allow this confession in because he believed it was bogus and counterfeit, then he should have been prepared with his own experts to prove just that. And he didn't do that. It's astounding to me that it took 10 years for someone to hire a handwriting expert with good credentials to examine this document
and see whether Mark Herman was the author of these documents. We did that. First thing we did upon taking this case was to hire Richard Casey. Richard Casey had 30 years with the FBI in the handwriting analysis field. Impeccable credentials, having no connection to this case whatsoever, totally impartial. He was retained by my firm to examine the documents known as 47 and 48 to see whether Mark Herman was the author. After seeing those documents and the documents he needed to perform his examination, he quickly reached the conclusion that Mark was not the author. Had Seppi bothered to have the documents examined pre-trial, he could have blown the prosecution out of the water by presenting a witness such as Richard Casey to say that Coffin fabricated this confession and Herman simply wasn't the author. With that before the trial jury, I'm confident that no reasonable jury could have returned a verdict of guilty.
Mark isn't going to be a killer on the one hand and a complete moron on the other. And this is one of the points that was the theme of my defense, was that the confessions that were being allowed in, the alleged confessions to Bain, to Gibson, to DeNono, and to Coffin already, forgetting the letter, were already going into evidence. I could not stop that. Didn't mean that the judge believed it or that anyone else believed it, but it was allowed to go into evidence for the jury to disbelieve or believe. And it was my evaluation that they were not believing these four people, because they all had their axes to grind, and DeNono was a 3 times or 4 times convicted axe murderer. That was our, quote, game plan, to show a total lack of credibility of these witnesses. And that's what I showed. Unfortunately, to the entire community, except the jury, and I cannot explain that. And just because I cannot explain the jury outcome does not mean that I did anything ineffectively or was a poor trial lawyer in that case. I happen to be, or was, an excellent trial lawyer. And that was just an assessment that I made in that case. And I think I was right. I don't think the outcome of the case was correct.
Mark Herman has thought a lot about 3 key people in that Palm Beach County courtroom in 1978. His attorney, Alfonso Seppi, prosecuting attorney Jack Scarola, and Judge Thomas Schultz.
I have mixed emotions about Judge Schultz. I like to believe that he made sure that my trial was as fair as it could be. But in my heart, I don't believe that he did. I think that he was a little bit more interested in this case being televised than he was in whether Mr. Seppi was totally prepared to defend me or not. And that might be all right in some types of cases, but this was a case that was capital offense. And, the mistakes that were made or the things that were done not to protect me, I had everything to lose. They didn't. And it was my life that they were juggling. I don't have any in mind.